Good morning. This is Bill Thompson from JFC Associates. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm here with John Gould here in Needham, Massachusetts, preparing our CONNEX IoT for EAM and Maximo discussion and demonstration. Before I pass it over to John, just wanted to provide 2 points of information. The first is this session is being recorded and it will be made available along with the presentation to all registrants. Secondly, we encourage Q&A during the session, both for IoT related questions, how to get started, as well as specific use case studies, how it can be applied within your facility, within your organization, or within your operation. To enter a question, there's a Q&A tab on your left-hand margin. Once you click that, you'll see a text box on the bottom, and we will be addressing those as we draw closer to the conclusion of our session. And without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to JFC's Director of EAM Services, Mr. John Gould.
All right, thanks, Bill. We are going to get started here. So as Bill mentioned, my name is John Gould. I'm the Director of Enterprise Asset Management Services for JFC and Associates. Thanks so much for joining us today. Wanted to give a little insight into IoT in general, as well as talk a little bit about the solution that we've developed called CONNEX that integrates IoT sensors out in the field, out in your facilities, and gets that information back to Maximo, as well as some other benefits and opportunities. So just wanted to give us a little bit of an agenda for today. We're going to go through some introductions here, which we just did, a little bit about JFC and Associates, talk a little bit about what IoT is, some use cases that may prompt some discussion for your organization, an overview of our CONNEX IoT for EAM solution that we've developed, and do a small demonstration of the solution that we have, and then we'll follow up with any questions and answers as you have them. So about JFC and Associates, we've been in the IBM Maximo marketplace for since 2006. We work with organizations on their overall enterprise asset management needs, both IoT, artificial intelligence, Maximo, asset management, developing different programs, preventative maintenance, things of that nature, assessments. We work with a lot of different world-class organizations and enable them to achieve success in their EAM space. We have over 100 years of both technical and functional experience combined, and have a great team here that provides services to our great client partners. Some of those partners we have on the screen here, some of you are on our call today, so thanks so much for joining us. But we just wanted to point out, really, we work with a variety of different industries, different client verticals in different areas, focusing on delivering on EAM for all of the different partners that we have. So let's talk a little bit about IoT. So really understanding and at a high level and how we're going to bring these components together. Really the focal point for IoT is monitoring your connected device. So understanding that you have a device that needs to be monitored. So an asset, a piece of equipment, an area, whether it's through readings from a piece of equipment or access to a location, people being in an area, there's a leak, things of that nature. So it's really about monitoring and understanding what's happening in your facilities. And then especially in today's landscape, when a lot of us are working from home these days, being able to have those insights into what's happening while you're not at your facility is even more critically important than ever. The second is the ability to control. So making changes and updates to these sensors, having the ability to control your devices out in the field as they require adjustments, not just relying on building automation systems, but really understanding what it is that's happening in your environment, identifying those critical needs, being able to control the outcomes. And then optimization. So really understanding the ability to take this data that is provided through having your assets connected via sensors to this IoT world, and being able to do some analysis on this data and understand better how your equipment is operating, how your facility is being utilized, and really just understanding that there's opportunities beyond just responding to problems or monitoring a piece of equipment. It's just really to be able to analyze that data in a way that you can make more meaningful decisions about how your organization is managing their assets. And then lastly, the automation side of things. So establishment of ITTT, so if this then that type protocols, automating and optimizing responses. So taking multiple sensors, taking multiple pieces of information, and being able to act on those in certain ways. And that's something where we've focused on our IoT journey and developing the ability to allow this type of functionality to enable you to really get that real-time notification based on multiple conditions and establish response criteria as needed. So let's talk a little bit about some use cases, right? So things like space temperature response, understanding that if there are temperature sensitivity areas, you have in the Northeast, we have to deal with a lot of freezing issues. So understanding and monitoring temperature space to be able to respond if there's a problem in the area. Leaks to water, so the potential for damage to equipment or personnel or property if there's a water leak that you're unaware of. Thermocouple sensors, so monitoring inlet and outlet temperatures of boilers or water, and then water levels, so understanding you may have lift stations or sump stations within your facilities that you have localized alarms. They may or may not be tied into your building automation system, so being able to monitor those locations for water levels and things of that nature and get that information into the hands of the people that need to respond. So these are just some use cases. Obviously there are many more. Our solution really encapsulates the ability to provide monitoring and oversight through multiple different sensor types, and we're happy to share that with you in addition to the slide deck and the presentation, just the different types of sensors that we can provide as a solution. So why IoT? So ultimately, monitoring equipment and assets is important and critical, but there are other use cases as well. So construction sensors, tracking workers' locations, body temperatures, accelerometers, create work planning activities based on people being in certain locations at certain times. Footfall sensors, how many people are going in and out of your restrooms to better optimize when your custodial and cleaning services actually need to go and do those services to ensure that you're providing the highest quality service to your customers. Trash barrel weight, so understanding if you have a large campus or large facilities with multiple locations, being able to monitor the weight in those particular receptacles to understand that you may need to go and respond out of your normal routines. And then ultimately work order generation, right? So we need to be able to create and get information about these assets into Maximo, whether it's through creating work orders, meter readings, or ultimately the actionable response within Maximo. So whether it's a service request, work order, or meter reading, our CONNEX solution actually provides those to you. So if there are specific use cases that you have in your organization, maybe if you want to put those into your Q&A question, we can respond to some of those in our discussion. And it'll also be helpful for the other participants just to understand that there's a lot of commonality between all your organizations, regardless if you're in a large industrial operation or a university or you own a single asset, single building. Just be good to share some of those use cases that you may have in your organization. So I encourage you to put that into the Q&A and we can discuss as we go through. So really, what is CONNEX? CONNEX is a state-of-the-art scalable IoT solution. It's designed and developed to collect, monitor, and analyze your real-time data to make it work harder than ever before. Our solution utilizes the Microsoft Azure IoT platform to securely, very important, and seamlessly integrate with your enterprise asset management system. This incredible point of note, and we talk a lot about security these days relative to information and control, the access to it, and things of that nature. So understanding that our solution has the highest possible levels of encryption relative to transfer of data between sensors and gateways, the information passing from those gateways to our IoT platform, all is encrypted throughout the entire process. And those are things that you want to consider as you're on your IoT journey, is an important focal point as you look to adopt IoT and into your AM system. So what are the components of CONNEX? So we have three main components to our solution. There's a dashboard function that provides a generic overview of the status of your sensors, your gateways, work order information that's happened, recent activities, the ability to compare and contrast sensors on a dashboard type function. Our IoT web app, that's the secret sauce. That's the solution that we've developed that allows you to control all of the sensors that you have in your field, establish those if this, then that protocols, and ultimately establish what criteria you have for creating work orders, service requests, or meter readings. And you have the ability to control that within our IoT web app. And then sensor and gateway management. So really our solution is a single solution that provides you the sensors, the gateways, the IoT web app, and the dashboard as a single enterprise asset management solution. There's a lot of organizations that can provide the sensors, a lot of organizations that may be able to provide the IoT analytics. Some may be able to integrate sensor data back to Maximo. With JFC and Associates CONNEX IoT solution, you really do have the ability to come to us for that single source of IoT for your organization. The point of note on that as well is that we also do have the ability to integrate to multiple different sensor and gateway types. So if you have other solutions within your organization currently for monitoring equipment, our IoT web app does have the ability to integrate those sensors and those gateways into Maximo and provide the same type of service that we would expect for our solution. So there are some benefits there as well. So we're not strictly focusing on our IoT sensors as an option. We do have some options available to integrate other gateways and sensors as well. So how does CONNEX work? The million-dollar question here. So ultimately, we have our CONNEX Cloud. It's our platform that we have developed for taking all of the sensor and gateway information and actually processing it through to Maximo as well as other notification methods. The sensors and the gateways themselves, so we gave some use cases earlier, but there are many others out there. So being able to monitor the equipment or monitor the areas and spaces that you need to, get that data and transmit that through the gateways to our IoT web app solution. And then the CONNEX Cloud itself. So that's where the processing of that information happens, ultimately allowing you to control how that information is going to be consumed by Maximo. So really important to note here that you have the ability and the flexibility to associate certain rules within our CONNEX Cloud app, IoT web app, that allow you to have complete autonomy over that process. So there are certain sensors you want to respond a certain way or create certain records. You have that control, and you'll be able to take that information and create those multiple sensor points. So that's an important point of note on this that really is a differentiator, I think, for our solution. What's different from condition monitoring in Maximo? Condition monitoring in Maximo monitors one single point associated to a meter on an asset, where our solution actually can take multiple data points, bring those data points together, and then create the actionable response that you need, creating those work orders, service requests, or meter readings. So it really does give you some more flexibility outside of the native Maximo functionality to accomplish what you need, particularly in the IoT space. That information, we're leveraging REST API calls to Maximo. This is standard functionality and stuff that's been in place for quite some time, and we're using those tools to integrate back to Maximo and send our sensor information to create those work orders, service requests, and meter readings. And then the sensor data is now available in Maximo. So as we've said before, whether we want to just create a work order or we want to only create meter readings and leverage the native condition monitoring functionality, the data is available within Maximo for you to do what you need to do. An important point of note about the sensor data is ultimately we have the control over how frequently we're sending this data to Maximo. So whether we want to push the data as the data is coming into our IoT web app, or we want to only send data when certain conditions are met, you really have that flexibility. And that's kind of an important point of note, because ultimately you may not want to have all your sensor data reside in Maximo. You may only be concerned about when certain conditions are meant to track that information in Maximo, whether it's through work orders, service requests, or meter readings. So this is an image of the dashboard. We're going to show this in the demonstration, but basically provide you insight to your organization. How many work orders have been created in the last day, how many different meter readings, service requests, how many of your sensors in your network are active, how many gateways are active, weather as well, monitoring specific readings. So if you have a need to pay a little closer attention to one or two or many, it's entirely configurable. Sensors in your organization, you can do that. Provides information on recent updates. So if meter reading was created, a work order is created, that information is in that recent updates panel. It also allows you to have click-through functionality, so I can click on the actual Maximo link and it'll bring up that particular record in Maximo. And then trending, right? So you can understand how many records were created over time, compare and contrast those over date ranges, and then actually monitor sensor trends for specific sensors over time. So this is the dashboard functionality. Can be configured to suit your needs. We've constantly focused on evolution in this product and continue to enhance it to suit our existing clients' needs. But this is really your window on the world for what's happening in your IoT network. The IoT Web App, so this is the solution that we've developed inside to manage that if this then that type scenarios, control how those sensors are going to interact with Maximo. We're going to do a little demonstration here too to show you that functionality. This is really what we are most proud of with our solution ultimately, is to be able to give you that control. It's very intuitive. Once these sensors are added to your web app, you have complete autonomy to control how they're set up, how they manage to send that information to Maximo, and the rules by which you want those things to connect and send that data. And really, this is really your complete control. Ultimately, your sensor data, how it's going to interact with Maximo is where the CONNEX IoT Web App comes into play. And then sensor management. So the ability to monitor your sensors and gateways that are in the field. This is an important area within our solution. It gives you control. You can actually see the data in a much more granular level if you need to, understand where the status of that particular sensor is, when any alerts or notifications have happened, the last time that sensor is checked in, as well as some reporting functionality, mapping, and then ultimately you can perform some charts and comparisons to different sensors. So this is really what we talk about, a total solution. It's, you know, dashboard insights, it's control over your sensors from how they integrate to Maximo, and then ultimately management of those sensors and those gateways. So this is a little further down within the hierarchy of the sensor management function, but the actual sensor information. So we can see things like our readings over time. This is for a vibration sensor that we have in place. Just understanding, you know, temperature, the frequencies, what's happening with that particular motor in the field, the networks that it's connected to, the last readings are in place. You can notice the little green icons, kind of hard to see on the screen, but the signal strength of that sensor as well as battery life really gives you some control there as well. But we're going to go through that in the demonstration as well, just kind of show you a little more insight there. Why CONNEX? Why do we feel this solution is important, especially in today's landscape? Ultimately, it's really a simple, intuitive design. Once set up and configured for your organization, you have the ability to have a complete autonomy over your data, and you can interact with and control your IoT environment in a way that fits your business needs. It's very simple for us to integrate. We built this solution to integrate to Maximo seamlessly, working with your IT organizations within your company to enable those API controls and allow for our solution to integrate with your system. It's actually a very simple process. And then ultimately scalability. We see this a lot in the IoT landscape these days as organizations are taking on pilot type programs to start to enable their IoT journey. And really that's one of the major benefits of our solution. You can start with a very small sensor set, work to refine how you want to interact with those sensors in Maximo, and then ultimately scale the solution to as many sensors and gateways in the field as you'd like. These sensors allow for transmission to gateways up to 1,200 feet from a gateway through 14 walls. There's the ability to provide line of sight to extend those distances further with certain antenna modifications. There's a lot of flexibility to that solution. We can have up to 150 sensors on a single gateway And there's also the ability to store data for those sensors communicating through those gateways wirelessly, if you should have power loss. So there is battery backup available on our gateways as well. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And then low startup cost to value proposition. So this is something we talk about with our customers all the time, particularly on the asset management space. What's the consequence of one failure, right? If something goes wrong and you have to respond and mitigate that failure, ultimately there's a cost to do that. So if you were to have a pipe burst because the temperature dropped too low in a room, ultimately that pipe could cause $100 of damage or $100,000 of damage. So ultimately the solution has a very low startup cost to that value proposition, where you can enable your organization to realize those savings, both actual and unrealized, for preventing failures. So there's some opportunities there relative to this value proposition. And really, what is this all about? It's about increasing reliability, the reliability of our plants, the reliability of our assets, the reliability of our organization's ability to provide the services to have the highest possible return on asset. That's really where IoT is starting to fully engage with many organizations, and understanding that this solution, IoT as a enabler, to focus on that increase in reliability. And then connecting the disconnected. Work with a lot of different organizations that may have legacy systems that aren't connected to their building automation systems. They have a difficulty integrating building automation systems with Maximo, which can be typically a major project. But there's maybe half a dozen or several dozen assets that they want to track that are more critical. Our solution allows you to simply install that sensor and gateway, set up your integration to Maximo, and then you have the ability to connect that disconnected asset. So there's a lot of opportunity there, particularly for systems that are disparate. You may have multiple building automation systems, but you only really care about certain assets that you want to monitor. And that's really where the CONNEX IoT solution comes into play. With that, I think we'll start off with a little demonstration to show you some of the features and tools here. So I'll hop out of this presentation for now. Before I do that, I'm just going to throw up the last slide here, and it's our information. So my email address and Bill's email address, as well as our website. I'm sure many of you may have these already, but if you wanted to jot those down, you certainly can. Happy to answer any questions offline as well, but just wanted to get you that information. I'll put that back up when we get through our Q&A as well. All right. So the JFC Connects IoT solution. So as we mentioned before, this is our dashboarding tool. Provides us the insight to understand what has been happening in our organization. We have 9 work orders in the system since midnight today, 50 different meter readings. We haven't created any service requests yet. There's 22% of our sensors are active right now. Some of them are turned off for reasons that we're not interacting very well in a web-based situation. We have our IoT demo box here in our office, and some of them don't lend themselves to web demonstrations, so some of those are not enabled right now. The weather information, it's a little chilly here in Needham today. Our recent updates, as we talked about before, so the work order ability here, you'll notice we have some refreshing that happens to get that information back. All of the different portlets that you see on your screen here, so readings, updates, the trending that's happening in the organization, these are all configured for refresh based on how you'd like to have them refreshed. So there's some autonomy and control there. And these are ultimately user driven, right? So as you make changes as a user to your own dashboard, those will be observed at future logins. So I can do things such as click on here once we get our refresh done. It'll launch Maximo. Of course, it's going to ask me to log in. There we go. Internet decided to participate today. This particular work order was for a door opening that we have here, and we're going to show that kind of opportunity here as well. But just really to have that ability from within your dashboard to say, hey, wait a minute, what's that work order? Be able to click on it and open it up. So really, this is a dashboarding functions. If you have specific needs relative to how you'd like this laid out, this is configurable. We can work with you on defining what those things are. So trending and analysis, understanding where our work orders, service requests, and meters have been created. The the sensor trend charts, the ability to come in and actually modify this so that I can change the title. So for opening, defining my chart ranges, picking my sensors. So I have the ability to select multiple sensors if I want to chart them against each other. Establishing our auto refresh, whether or not we want this to auto refresh or to be static data, and then our intervals as well. So that really gives us the opportunity to modify and change how you want to visualize the data within our dashboard. Hovering over provides the insight to say at that particular time, what was the status of that particular sensor. Multiple sensor trend charts can be provided. We have 2 set up right now, but if you needed additional, we can add additional sensor trends there as well. So this is the dashboarding type function. We're going to skip over the configuration. We're going to save that for last. We'll go to the CONNEX Cloud configuration area. So this is really our sensor and gateway management area. This gives us the ability to add sensors to our networks, set up user accounts and controls over what users can do. Administrators have complete autonomy to control this portion of our solution. So if there are certain individuals in your organization that only need to be able to see data and not interact with these sensors in terms of changing settings, you have that ability and that control. The ability to provide reporting, and then understanding ultimately within this dashboard, the status of our organization, what's going on with our sensors, what the last readings were. I can view the sensor specifically and understand, ultimately where our organization is within our sensors. A nice component of this solution as well is the ability to set up multiple networks. So if you have areas within your organization that you want to group certain buildings together in a specific network that only allowing certain users to access, you have that control, as well as the ability to manage multiple sites or locations. So if you have a large campus with different, large university with different campuses located in different parts of the state, you'll be able to segregate out those areas to really get some more refined control. The sensor control itself, so understanding ultimately what is happening with our sensors. So this is our little dashboard. We can see what is going on. We have our certain sensors that are here. I can click on a sensor and there's a lot of control within here. So this is our vibration meter that we have right now, but you can see we have the ability to establish the different date and time ranges that we would like to see the readings chart on. We have the specific duty cycle for this particular vibration sensor in this data set here. We have the ability to control just through simple sliding to see over time how things are working. And then a nice component of it really is just to be able to actually download this as a chart format. So we can actually do it as a file, as well as the ability to download the data directly to a CSV file. So you have those functions as well available to you. Some other components to this. So actually when we go to our reading section for this particular sensor, we actually have all of the sensor history. I can pull this information down into a CSV file. So if you needed to do more analysis, you have all that information here, the status, the battery, the data that was sent, your signal strength, the voltage. So really refined detail about our sensors is available to you to download as well. Actions. So a really nice component of this solution is not only the ability to integrate with Maximo and understand creating work orders, service requests, and meter readings, but also notifications. I'm going to pull up a different sensor to show you one where I have this now, and I'm going to demonstrate this for you. So we have a door sensor here, and we're going to go over to our action section. And we have an action opportunity that is here for now. If the door is open, it's going to send some notifications to us. So let's go to our actions. These are global actions. And we have actions history. So this is another component that's really nice. So as things are happening in our organization and we want to be able to track over time where notifications sent, who is notified, all of that control is available to you in here, who gets notified, so we can actually set up recipients, emails, notifications, text alerts, and we also have the ability to perform robocalls. So all of those functions are available to you. You can toggle on or toggle off certain functions within here. Another nice component of this is that if you had a tiered approach to response, so you had individuals that need to be notified at certain intervals. So if there was no resolution to that particular action within a certain period of time, we can actually establish delay periods for this and different users that are in here. So you may not want to have an escalation in place that everyone gets notified right away, but that you tier your notifications as well. So the ability to control the messaging, so subject alerts, messages that you would like to send, this is all configurable. You can change it to whatever you'd like. You can specify specific text within your SMS messages, and then alert snoozing, right? So we don't want this thing to send every single second or every minute if there's the problem hasn't been resolved, so we can actually establish our alert criteria here. And then system actions required. So we need to acknowledge it. There is no delay in this target notification as the door is being opened. So I'm going to go ahead on our IoT box here right now, and I'm going to open our door sensor. And I'm going to close it. And I'm going to go back here to our home. And you'll notice this is actually not in Eastern time right now, but at 2:31, the door was opened. And what I will do is I'm going to show you on my email here. I received an email notification that the door to the elevator machine was open. So I can't see my cell phone right now, but I did receive a text alert saying that the door was open as well. So really the opportunity to expand this beyond Maximo, right? So there's many organizations that we don't need to create a meter reader. We really don't need a work order. We just need someone to know that there's a problem. So our solution really gives you that opportunity to control that at a sensor level, as well as within these alerts that you're establishing, you can associate multiple sensors to it. So you don't have to do this on a sensor by sensor basis. Another component of the CONNEX Cloud area is the mapping. So I can create maps, taking PDFs of floor plans, campuses, highways, railways, whatever the case may be, and load those as maps and actually be able to visualize and see where my sensors are. The ability to hover over and see what the status was on the particular sensor. If I have an issue, there's no reading here. The temperature is no current reading because the battery is actually out of that sensor right now. And then this larger amperage meter is also not connected to a motor right now, but there's no water present here on our map. So this is the ability to actually see where our sensors are in our facility. Very simple. I can edit my map. I can define which sensors I want to have available on my map just by checking and unchecking. You can see here, I just checked that, and I'm going to put this over here on there. So that really, now when I go back and save this map, and go back to our map, that sensor has just been placed. So, this is a visualization tool some organizations find very helpful to understand. They want to see, what's going on in a particular space or a particular area. You have the ability to create multiple maps, so you're not restricted to just a single map, and it gives you some of that insight and that control. So we have a water sensor here, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put my little sensor probe here into a cup of water to demonstrate this for you. So it's going to take a second. I'm going to go back to my map here. And you'll notice that the icon changed to red, and that means that there is water present on that particular sensor. So color coding of these particular sensors is pretty apparent, right? Green is good. We're within our parameters, within our conditions for that sensor. And then ultimately, if there's a problem sensor or there's a criteria that you've established as a read to send, we're going to note that here. So we have water present, and we can go to these sensors and note too, we have notification saying that there's water present. You can also get that at the dashboard level, understanding there's water present here. I'm going to take this out, make sure we're not sending this continuously. And then seeing the alerting sensor that we have a problem. So water detected is true, and we can manage that. So we have our stamp here. So we sent an email and a text message at this particular time, 10:33 a.m. to these users. So it provides some history as well when these notifications are sent. Within the sensors themselves, there's quite a bit of control that you have to establish what we want to do with this particular sensor. So the settings on these sensors, so understanding, naming, the heartbeats, how often these are checking for values or statuses. This is configurable based on different sensors types. So if you only care about capturing a particular reading once a week, once a day, once an hour, you can establish your aware states and your intervals for checking. Entering an aware state when water is present. So each sensor is going to have slightly different control. And then time to rearm, we can establish that criteria to say, we're going to rearm that sensor after 20 minutes or an hour or 1 minute. And then the failed transmissions before link mode, this will establish the ability for us to actually find another gateway to send that information if the primary gateway that's associated with that sensor is not available. And that gateway management is also quite simple. We have our gateway here. We have two. We have a cellular 2G gateway that we have powered off right now, but our LTE gateway is on, and we can see all of the transmissions that are happening with that particular sensor. So we have data that's sent, it's line powered. There were 2 messages that came over, and then understanding the different sensors that are associated to that specific gateway. So these are the list of sensors that are associated to those gateways. There's no configuration required here to point sensors to gateways. The sensors are smart enough and enabled to find the strongest broadcast signal to the closest sensor, or I'm sorry, the closest gateway. So if you have multiple gateways in the area, it's going to find the best connection to establish that. So that's the sensor and gateway management side of things. There are many other features and components in here. We can dive into those further, but I did want to talk a little bit about the platform configuration, and this is really where it's important on the Maximo side. So this is the IoT web app that we've developed that allows us to establish our sensors. We can create new sensors. We can actually look at the raw sensor data that's coming over and understand the different components and what we want to do. So water detection, let's go through that one as we just did a water detection component here. There's an API configured and a filter group, and we'll talk through that a little bit further. But I'm going to go ahead and edit this sensor and just show you the basic functionality that's in here. It's quite simple. So the sensor ID is, this ID is actually physically on our sensor itself. It tells us which device is connected where. We're going to give it a name, what type of sensor it is. So all of the sensors that we have integrated with here right now are on this list. So we're going to define what type of sensor it is. The server, so understanding where in Maximo are we pointing this to. And we can show you there, and we'll show you how to configure that. It's quite simple. The push frequency, so if we wanted to send all data at a certain interval or just daily send the data, and then what site within Maximo is it connecting to. So you may have multiple sites in your organization in your single Maximo instance. We can define which data this is going to. And if there's a specific gateway that we need to define outside of our solution, we can establish the different gateway providers that are there. And some gateway providers require sensor validation code. So all of that functionality is right there for you. It's very simple to populate. And then our API configuration. So ultimately, this is where we're going to send to Maximo. We're going to define what we want to send to Maximo. So in this particular case, I'm just going to edit this real quick and show you what type of API call are we going to do. We're going to create a work order. The other options are service request, asset meter, or location meter. The owner record, so in this particular case, it's an asset. If it were location, it would be for location. The record ID, this is the Maximo asset number. And when we create that asset meter in Maximo, we're establishing what the Maximo meter ID is. And lastly, the site ID for that particular site. So very simple to define and create the APIs based on how you want the sensor to interact with Maximo. You can create multiple APIs. So if I wanted to add an additional API to create a service request, I could, or a meter reading, all configurable based on how you'd like it to interact with Maximo. Defining when it interacts with Maximo. So within this is where we've defined the sensor, how it's going to interact with Maximo in terms of the API calls that are made. Ultimately, we need to define those if this then that rules. So this particular example We have multiple filter groups that we've created for our demonstration purposes here. So I'll show you this door test one, and can also show you the water present. I'll just do water first since it's first. So this is our if this then that type scenario. So the water is present. This is the grouping name. We can establish wait durations. This is typically defined on the sensor control side. We can also control it within the filter groups. So if we had multiple filter groups where we needed multiple sets of conditions to be defined, we can set durations before the next filter group checks to see if those conditions are met. The gateway and the filter property. So if these particular things where we can establish of the different sensors we have within this network, which component or which property of these sensors do we want to monitor? The operator, so equal to, greater than, less than, or less than or equal to, and the value. So it's as simple as adding those conditions here. And this is our condition that we've already created. And this condition is water is detected equals to 1, and this is a binary value because 0 is no water and 1 is there is water. When this condition is met, this is what defines the API call happening in Maximo. So ultimately, when we're in a position to associate these sensors to this filter, we're going to define, we defined already how we want the sensor to interact with Maximo. This is defining the conditions by which those API calls are going to be made. So it's really gives you some flexibility to establish your if this then that rules. So in this particular case, we have a different condition, water near boiler 1. If the temperature is less than 32 degrees and there is water present, then make the API call for that sensor to create the records that have been defined in the APIs. It's very simple. So if you have multiple sensors that you wanted to associate with this particular filter group. So if you have multiple sensors where you need to have the same set of conditions, you can associate multiple sensors to these groups. So it really gives you the control to establish your if this then that parameters right inside of the IoT Web App. On the server side, it's quite simple. For the integration point, we're using the REST API, Maximo REST APIs available to us in here. We can have multiple servers, so if you wanted to connect it to a development server, a test server, and then ultimately to your production server, the user IDs and the components to there. So really being able to establish your endpoints, your URLs, and the user that you're connecting through to this. So this gives you an additional layer of control if you wanted to establish and create an IoT user in Maximo with certain permissions to enable and allow those APIs to be accessible to that user only and not to the rest of your user base. You can really have some more refined control here as well. The gateway control, so this is the gateway list. If we had gateways outside of our solution, we'd be able to establish the gateways within here. Because our solution is fully integrated, we don't list our individual gateways here, and then ultimately your sites. So this is sites within the CONNEX IoT solution, not Maximo sites, is an important point of note. So you can further refine site level control within our IoT web app to say we want to establish, further refinement of breaking apart parts of our organization into those components. And then lastly is the users. So really being able to establish, certain users, which sites they have access to, their information, their role, whether it's a cooperator, so that's someone that's interacting, or an administrator who can actually establish and create controls. So really those are the components that come together. So we have our dashboarding feature that provides us the insight at a high level about our sensors, our assets, our meters, what's happening within our IoT network, information about, so here we had a work order that was created. Let's go there. I believe this is when we opened our door. Yep, so the door is open. So these can be defined too as well. If there's additional information you need to pass over. This one's pretty basic. We're just doing the reported date and time as well as a description and the asset that the particular sensor was associated with. So you really have a lot of control ultimately in the data and information that comes over to Maximo. But to be able to see that on the dashboard and see what's happening there is a powerful tool. Our platform configuration, as I said, this is our IoT web app that allows us to take all of these sensors and define how they're going to interact with Maximo, define how those filter groups and conditions are going to be established. And then lastly, our CONNEX Cloud, our sensor management platform that allows us to control sensors, establish the parameters by which notifications can be sent, and really gives you the insight down to a very refined level about the data that's in your organization. So we're right at our time for the demonstration purposes. I'll pull up the Q&A here. Just bear with us 1 second. Bill's going to hop on here real quick.
All right, thanks. Thanks, John. I wanted to give you a second to catch your breath. I asked John to go about 45 minutes. He went to 10:45, so I like that type of precision. We do have a number of questions that we'll talk through over the next 15 minutes. One thing I did want to encourage, if there are any use cases that you've been thinking of during this discussion, or maybe you've been thinking of on the topic, please submit those via the Q&A text box. We'd be happy to address that. John did share both our email addresses. We'd be happy to do that privately as well. For the first question, I'd like to read from here. I'm going to switch over to John, so just give us a second. Is this service provided only through Microsoft Azure? Are there other deployment models?
So, 1 second. There we go. So the Azure platform is the backbone of the IoT Web App. The one point of note within here is that we can deploy this solution on the cloud-based process that we have in place now, but we can also deploy this locally. So if you had the ability to stand up the Azure platform within your organization and did not need the data to come to the JFC Connects cloud, we can deploy that solution locally as well. But the backbone for this is the Microsoft Azure IoT platform. And there's a reason why we did that. They are, from a maturity level in the IoT space, they're much further ahead than a lot of other organizations right now are in terms of IoT development. And it's one that we found to be the most robust and provide the best benefit for us. But within our model, in our control that we have within our CONNEX IoT Web App and our solution, we can deploy components of this as well. So if there's a part of this that you'd want to deploy, maybe you don't need a dashboard, maybe you just need to monitor sensors and send notifications and don't need to integrate with Maximo, we can provide that service as well. The control and the sensor management is always going to be a component to this. So there's opportunities there as well.
Okay, related to that, the mapping tool, is it a vectored image that retains quality when zooming? Switch over.
Yeah, sorry, there's some muting issues here. So just going back to here, so pulling up that question on the mapping feature. So this ultimately, you can take that vector image and I can zoom in based on the quality of that file. So if I needed to go back and create a new map, you're restricted right now to PNG files and JPEG files, but you can control that through the quality of the image that's there. So as you can see, I can, if you had a very complex piece of equipment that you wanted to have as a mapping component with multiple sensors on it, it's really going to come down to the quality of the data that's in your image file that you have.
Thanks, John. And Next up is, can you talk a little bit about remote monitoring of assets? I know you touched on it early on. Situation like today, essential employees may be on premise. What happens if I'm the manager and I'm working remotely? I might be traveling, but these days I might be working from home. Any use case studies or anything that you've done that you can comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a situation where we have some of our customers that we work with now that need to monitor equipment 24/7. So they may have items that are typically monitored through rounds that are done by the staff, and they'll check to see that there's opportunities within, the equipment's operating functionally. But the second they walk out the door, that piece of equipment can fail. So having the ability to provide those notifications and those support needs based on your specific use cases, yes, we do see that a lot. Where as facility manager, as a former facility director myself, I understand the 24/7 nature by which these assets and equipment need to be up and running, and you can't be at the office 24/7. So with that being said, our solution also includes both iOS and Android mobile platform as well. So you can access this information on your mobile device, manage and control your sensors, get the information and pull up that information directly on your mobile phone and not need to necessarily be tethered to a desktop. So we do also offer that solution as well.
Two more for you, John. First, for condition monitoring, is there a library of equipment design conditions, i.e. a bearing library with design, vibration, temp ranges that guide the set points for various sensors?
So really this is not, there's no universal library. It would be at the specific asset level. So there are operating conditions and ranges that you would expect for an installation. So just because it's a 100 horsepower motor doesn't necessarily mean that those vibration requirements or the condition or setup of how that motor is operating is a universal truth. So the libraries of that information really are not entirely useful. Typically during a commissioning process, you're going to establish the components by which your optimal optimization for that piece of equipment is, what the vibration readings should be at optimal operating speeds and capacities. They're going to be dependent upon, VFDs and the drive components that are there. So understanding what your baselines are and then establishing those within your sensor profile to say, here is our acceptable operating range, and if things fall outside of that range, that's when we want to respond. So it is both use case and application specific. So just because it's a pump in a room, it could be a different operating capacity and for a different purpose. So we typically find that it's dependent upon its operation.
Thank you, John. And we have one more question. It's from our partner, Project. Would CONNEX be able to sit between something like Pi Historian and provide mapping from Pi records to corresponding Maximo records, as well as filter readings for condition monitoring in Maximo, so only readings at specific thresholds, say warning level, are passed on to Maximo?
It's a great question, Chris. Sorry, I can't get that one out. I've been talking a little bit here. So back to my original point about being able to integrate with other gateways and other data. So think of this more holistically. If you have data sources that you need to get into our solution, if they're able to publish that information, whether through an API or through the, in integration with, whether it's a database connection or things like that, we could pull that data into Maximo and monitor into our IoT web app, monitor that data and utilize that filter group functionality as well as the sensor profile that we've associated in Maximo. So that sensor is going to be associated to Maximo somewhere. When those conditions are met, we can't process that. So there are other opportunities outside of just sensor data from IoT devices that we can look to leverage as well. There's certain organizations are looking at taking certain SCADA data that typically may be a closed system that is not available outside of that SCADA network, and getting that information into Maximo through other means. So really the opportunity there is endless, I would say. The ability to leverage data into our IoT web app to then perform those responses is certainly a possibility.
Well, thank you, John. I do believe that is the end of our, oh, we have one more question. Apologies. It feels, okay, that was just more of a comment. If there's no more questions, I'll let John say some final words, but I'll also like to say a few things. First of all, thank you all for attending, being here this morning. A recording of the session will be sent out along with the presentation file to everyone on here this morning. If you have questions that come up following this or some use cases that you'd like to inquire about with John and I, please feel free to respond to the message you'll receive from me with that, and we can get back to you separately. I wanted to mention we have our next webinar in our webinar series on EAM is a focal point on our Maximo work over the last 20 years as JFC and Associates. I like to say ranging from Nantucket to the Golden Gate Bridge, innovation, lessons learned, and experiences shared. So that will be, I think we're targeting June 10th on that. I'll include that in my future communications. I'd like to pass it on to John and say thank you for, first of all, John, thank you to the audience for being here this morning, and thank you to John for leading us through the content. Pass it over to John, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Bill. Just to echo Bill's sentiment, thanks so much for attending today. IoT is a very important component of the EAM landscape. Their estimates are in the trillions of dollars of an industry in the next 10 years. And as such, JFC, we really tried to position ourselves to help our client partners in their IoT journey. And as the saying goes, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So understanding that you can start your IoT journey at a smaller scale, recognize and realize value from having IoT integrated into your EAM systems, and understanding that really what we're talking about is just increasing reliability and understanding that there's opportunities through integration and tools of this nature to really help you in those areas in your organization. So I'd encourage you, any follow-up questions that you have, if you need specific information about our platform, about our sensors and solutions, feel free to reach out to Bill or myself, and we'd be happy to answer those questions. And once again, thank you for your time, and look forward to speaking with you in the future.